Our final session of this year's conference tackles a topic of high recent focus. Our panel will discuss how we can continue to build a vibrant Canadian life sciences environment and encourage investment in the Canadian life sciences sector. Ensuring a strong, competitive domestic life sciences sector with cutting-edge biomanufacturing capabilities is critical to a strong economy and to make sure that Canada is prepared for pandemics and other health emergencies in the future. Today, we welcome 5 life science industry experts who will discuss this topic. Karima S. Sabar is the founding CEO and partner at Quark Venture, a global venture capital firm and director of the Global Health Sciences Fund focused on bioscience investment in therapeutics, vaccines, medical devices, digital health, AI, and convergent disruptive technology companies. Prior to joining Quark Venture, Karima was the CEO and president of the Centre for Drug Research and Development and the CEO and president of Life Sciences BC. Dr. Jason Field is president and CEO of Life Sciences Ontario, an organization that collaborates with governments, academia, industry, and other life science organizations across Canada to promote and encourage commercial success throughout the diverse sector. Jason's professional experience includes the pharmaceutical industry and the Ontario government before joining Life Sciences Ontario. Anne-Marie Christine Thoft works as a special advisor within life sciences in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, attracting foreign investments into the Danish life sciences sector. Carl Veal is the president and CEO of Quebec International, having joined the organization after nearly 20 years as a senior executive in the private sector. Today's panel will be led by Dr. Shanil Ibrahim, who is a partner in the Life Sciences and Healthcare Artificial Intelligence leader at Deloitte, Canada. Shanil has a strong expertise in AI, data analytics, and analytics strategy, and has worked internationally with public and private health sector organizations in delivering large, complex engagements. Dr. Ibrahim, I pass it over to you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Firstly, I want to thank the conference for inviting me today. And as Anne-Marie mentioned, we have an amazing group of panelists who are going to be talking about a range of topics, from the need for public-private partnerships to bolster investments, barriers and challenges, key examples of where partnerships have worked tremendously well in other nations, and what we need to be doing to going forward. The specific topic of encouraging investments in the Canadian life sciences sector is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I'd like to kick off with a couple of stories I want to share. The first is a story that involves Israel. Now, many moons ago, one of my fellow partners at Deloitte Israel reached out to us in Canada and mentioned, hey, I've seen a lot of reports around the investments and public-private frameworks that Canada has built. We can learn a lot from you. Now, what I'd like to propose is I bring down our Minister of Health from Israel, and we spend a week with your leaders. Now, that was a great phone call. Now, Israel is a very forward-thinking country, especially in healthcare, and they want to come down and learn from us. Now, when they came down, we were very transparent and welcoming. We showed them our ideas, our use cases, what we had in plans, the conversations we were having, and the frameworks we were developing, from investment plans to public-private partnership pyramids, and the tech, data, and IP frameworks we built to enable all of that. Now, they flew back energized and started thinking through on how they would do this in Israel. Fast forward 3 years, Israel Ministry of Health invested $1 billion in digital health, focused on commercializing their data banks that they have been building with their HMOs for nearly a couple of decades. And this included the launch of the TMNA big data research platform that was made available to researchers, developers, and companies, and created a spark in the healthcare startup scene in Israel, which we all have read about. Now, that's an amazing advancement within a few years. Where were we in Canada in that same time frame? Well, we were still talking about our frameworks, and we were still talking about what we were planning on doing, but there wasn't enough action. Funny story is that we invited Deloitte Israel partners and the minister to come back, but this time to teach us how they did it in Israel. Now, the second story I want to share is one close to home, which was the Canadian Innovation Supercluster Initiative. This was the initiative where the federal government invested nearly $1 billion into what they call superclusters, a group of public-private organizations to drive growth, prosperity, jobs, and global leadership. Now, there were 5 superclusters chosen in 2018 by our ministry. One of them was a digital technology supercluster focused on precision medicine, where they plan to build a platform to enable the health and genomic data sharing and applications. Now, this involved prestigious companies and startups such as Microsoft, TELUS, GE, Change Healthcare, and public organizations like UBC, Genome BC, BC Cancer, Providence Healthcare, and UHN, to name a few. Now, depending on who you speak to, the superclusters were either a success in terms of it bringing together partners, exchanging capital and investments between public and private entities, and increasing the breadth and diversity of talent. For some, though, it didn't live up to the hype. There was an article actually in the Globe and Mail which referred to the supercluster as the super boondoggle in the making, that made audacious promises designed to please the government in order to tap into some public sector money. However, if you ask me on my personal view, I see superclusters as a success for one main reason. It provided a pretty big spark which Canada really needed. Superclusters actually pushed pharma companies and other life sciences companies out of the supercluster ecosystem completely at the start. And what this did was it sparked new consortiums to rise out of the supercluster, and it led to life sciences-led consortiums like Canadian Precision Health Innovation Network, CFIN, which created a network to enable access to personalized solutions. The next year, it led to the initiation of the CIF fund that granted $49 million to the Terry Fox Research Institute and Magia-led consortium to improve precision medicine. It led to Quebec sparking its own local ecosystem of 12 life sciences companies and more than 30 public sector partners to create Montreal's AI zone to accelerate local development and international adoption of AI innovations in healthcare. Now, I personally spent a few years in Silicon Valley, and the one thing I learned is not every investment is going to pan out, but it's the environment that we build that matters. Now, Silicon Valley got this right. They created an environment that fosters success, one that is characterized by innovation, collaboration, risk-taking, and a deep capital pool of investments, which is exactly what we need to do here. Now, this is a topic that I'm looking forward to hearing and talking about with my colleagues. And with that, I'd like to pass it to Karima first, who will touch on this from her experience.
Thank you, Shanil. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with this great panel. I'm just going to start with a little bit of background and history. This isn't the first time we're having this discussion and talking about this particular topic. There have been many discussions before this, and there have been many reports that have been produced over the past 50 years in what we need to do with our health bioscience sector and our health sector as a whole, because the two are very much tied together. The most recent reports that, in fact, strategies that have been developed in conjunction with ISAD and Health Canada and industry in the private sector and leaders from the private sector around the economic strategy tables. And the Health Bioscience Economic Strategy Table, fondly known as HBEST, produced their report in 2018, which was later followed by the Industry Strategic Council work, which was done during the COVID period. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of a summary of that before we move on with my colleagues into some deep discussions around many of the topics. So let me start by first re-quoting myself from that report. I said at that time that Canada needs to unlock the full potential of its innovations and accelerate the pace of commercialization to ensure a sustainable, globally competitive health ecosystem with a robust innovation economy and an improved health outcomes. And why was the health outcomes and the economy tied together? Well, let me elaborate a little bit on that. It was very much discussed and agreed upon that having bold ambitions is not enough. We really have to support this beyond good intentions with robust structural and cultural conditions to enable us to build this kind of an ecosystem that is sustainable. And there were a few key elements of that that had to happen. The first was we needed a health policy environment that sees the healthcare of Canadians and the economic growth of health and biosciences sector as mutually reinforcing. In other words, health and industry and the development of the bioscience industry were very much tied together. A public healthcare system that is an early adopter and is incentivized to support innovation adoption. So one of the barriers that was identified is that we are not early adopters. We're great at science, we're great at R&D, we're great at innovation, but we're not great at adopting even our own innovation. We are one of the laggers when it comes to adoption. The third thing was agile and streamlined regulatory and procurement approaches to support access to value-based innovations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, because I think that during the COVID period, we actually had some really good response from Health Canada in that light. The fourth was to build a nationally robust, digitalized, interconnected, and patient-centered health data infrastructure end-to-end in our country that was not fractured and was totally interoperable. The fifth was we needed a large and vibrant life science capital market, and that invests significantly in Canadian companies. This had to be both with Canadian money and our ability to attract foreign investment and large life science companies to come and participate here as well. And finally, a knowledge-intensive sector that fosters future-oriented skill development and delivers world-class research and development, and then monetizes that research and development through innovation and commercialization. So these areas are not the first time these were identified in HBEST. They've been talked about before. But the reality has been that no action was taken. And we proposed a 5-point action plan on strategy, which is around accelerate innovation adoption. So by employing value-based approaches in the healthcare system, design agile regulations, and make sure that adopting international best practices and decreasing review times and fragmentation in the country. We have multiple levels of entry for our regulation, and this has to change. It has to be streamlined. And we saw Health Canada do that for COVID, which means it is possible to do. They did a very good job on the regulatory management during COVID of the vaccines. The third was to harness digital technology, and I think we're going to talk about that with my colleagues quite a bit later. Similarly, with develop and attract talent, the idea of equipping Canadians for highly skilled jobs in this sector by eliminating hiring barriers, streamlining government skills programs, and making sure we build robust partnerships, public-private partnerships between academia, industry, and government to reskill, upskill, and continue skilling. And finally, creating those anchor firms, because we are very good at the early science, at R&D, we have great academic institutions, we're very good at startups and entrepreneurship, but then we're not so good at anchoring companies here and building that ecosystem that's sustainable so that there are continuous jobs and we keep both our IP and our talent here. And all this can be done with the underlying premise that we have to have strong public-private partnerships and a national policy that's integrated to support this. So I'll leave my comments at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Karima. Everything Karima said was absolutely spot on. I couldn't agree more. We used to say that Canada really has all the ingredients to be a leading life sciences jurisdiction, and all we needed was the recipe to pull it together. Well, we have the recipe, as Karima pointed out. In fact, we have several recipes. She talked about HBEST, which is actually a phenomenal effort and collaboration between industry and government, and really highlighted, a lot of the past discussions in this space and really charted the path forward that Karima talked about. But what's missing is implementation. So we've got the recipes. We have to get cooking, and now's the time to do it. And I think the pandemic has really created an opportunity, a window of opportunity where we recognize the importance of investing in Canadian life sciences and the impacts it can have for our health security and our economic security as a country. So we really need to take advantage of this. So implementation is key. The other key element that we need to focus on to be more competitive is coordination. So when I think about the question of why haven't we been able to implement these strategies, these reports, these plans, what's the barrier? And I think there's two things that are really coming into play here. Number one is a lack of coordination. So life sciences is not an easy sector for government to really move forward policies, because typically speaking, health policy and economic policy are treated very differently. And oftentimes there's not alignment. And we've seen that. We've seen that in the case of investments being made in biomanufacturing as part of the response to the pandemic, and all the while there are regulatory pricing changes happening in the background that really position Canada as a global outlier and erode our competitiveness. So we can't be trying to push the accelerator and the brake pedal at the same time. We need to have better alignment. So one of the other strategies that have been launched recently, post HBEST, but just prior to our most recent federal election, was the biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy. And, they borrowed a lot of elements from HBEST and actually referenced back to HBEST, but there was one unique element that I really wanted to call out on that strategy that I think is really important. That is a commitment to have a cross-governmental governance structure in approaching developing the life sciences sector in Canada. It really is about taking an all-of-government approach. When we think about challenges like climate change, all ministries have that mentality and view their mandate through that particular lens. And we need to do the same in terms of elevating and accelerating our life sciences industry here in Canada. The second challenge that I think we need to address is one of trust. It's trust between the industry and government, and it's trust between the industry and the Canadian public. And those are both different but similar. We had a conference recently where we had a speaker named Jack Bobo talking about public communication, and he really nailed it, I think. And it kind of shocked me because I'm a scientist, and I believe that data and evidence really needs to speak loudly, and that can sway opinions. And Jack said, no, that's not the case. The data actually is secondary to whether or not someone trusts you, because if they trust you, it doesn't really matter what the data says, right? They will believe what you're saying, and it works both ways. It's one of the reasons why we're challenged with misinformation, because as scientists, I think we think about it through that data standpoint. But people need to understand why you do what you do. And I think this is something that the industry needs to do better at communicating. Many view this industry, and yes, it is an industry, we're here to make money, but unlike any other industry in the world, we're committed to saving lives. And if you talk to individuals from the companies that operate in the life sciences industry, they're not bragging about how much money they make. They're bragging about the solutions, the technologies that are going into our health systems and saving lives. So that's a point of pride that I think we need to elevate in terms of our public communications. The other thing we have to remember is that even though there are a lot of multinational firms here in Canada, there are a lot of homegrown talent here, and within all of this landscape of Canadian life sciences, there are Canadians that are employed. They're fighting for investments to come to Canada. They have a vested interest here. So we are in this together. We're sharing the same health system. It's not that these are faceless corporations. These are Canadians that are actively participating in the life sciences industry, and they do have skin in the game. I think the pandemic has really shone a spotlight on what we can accomplish when we really identify these common goals together. Prior to the pandemic, I would say that there is somewhat of an antagonistic relationship between industry and government. And of course, that, as Karima pointed out, a lot of that was set aside and focused clearly on the challenge at hand, which was COVID-19. In terms of building public trust, obviously, public trust in science has been a big talking point during the pandemic. But there's another particular issue that I think we really need to focus in on, and that is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And in particular, when we talk about health equity, the social determinants of health, we need to, I think, first and foremost as an industry, take a hard look in the mirror. There was a recent report by BioTalent Canada that shows that our industry really is not performing very well in terms of diversity and inclusion and equity. And we need to ask ourselves why that is and start examining the established cultures and the systemic structures right from academia and training through to professional development into leadership roles within our sector. And it's only by addressing these shortfalls in our own sector that then we're going to be able to be influencing health equity in our health system. And that will in turn be building public trust, because our industry will look like the society that we're serving. So I think these are important elements that need to be addressed. And I'm going to stop there and hand it over to my colleague, Carl Veal.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome, everyone. And thank you very much for the invite. I'm very pleased to be with you as well. And if I may, I'm just going to go back to two points that actually were discussed by Karima and Jason. I think that, when you look at it from an industry perspective, when we're looking at a market to come in or to expand, there's a few factors that play into the decision making. Number one is the environment. So Jason has touched on a few points in regard, and also Karima in terms of the different public reports that were done. And I think at the end of the day is, the question is how come Canada has not moved upon the recommendations that were made and very clear and actually could help us to play a bigger role in the life science sector as a global point. The second key element is one that actually in Canada we cannot play, and it's not an attractive sector, is the size of the market. So let's work on the environment. What can we do? What can we do to distinguish ourselves? And I think one of the third key element the industry will be looking at when they're looking at investing and looking at what we can do to continue to build this environment in Canada and the investment is the talent. So talent, as we all know, is now not only a key element of the different companies around the world, but we also know that is also something that a lot of companies are trying to find. And if we look at the Canadian sector, we all know that we've been through different cycles, and we're back into a very positive cycle right now. And companies are looking to find talent. So attraction of talent is one of the key that the industry will be looking at The second one is how can we retain the current talent that we have? And the third component that was also touched on by Karima was also what can we do to develop, upgrade the talent pool that we have in our companies? What type of knowledge, what type of competence are we looking at to continue to not only build a talent pool, but also address the needs that is changing, evolving from the different companies we've seen in vaccine, for example, RAN that was not in the mix a few years ago, which is now a key element of the vaccine scene. The other element that we also have to look at from a talent perspective is how can we continue to build a relationship with the universities, the colleges to not only train, but making sure that the people that are going to be coming into the sector are answering the needs of the industry. A lot of the things we're also hearing is that, yes, we need PhD, but a lot of the companies will be looking at people with undergrad degrees, and the companies will do the training and actually get them full to speed into addressing their own needs and the own requests that they have. The other element that was also touched on that I think is also important to see what we can do, because there are some gaps in the Canadian industry right now that we don't have that talent pool in Canada, so we have to look globally to attract those people to move to Canada. So I was also thinking that we should also see what we can do on the global talent program to not only to expedite, but also finding ways to streamlining the process to attracting new talent to fill the gaps that our SMEs, biotech companies are actually trying to fill, and they can't find them in Canada. The other thing that we also have to look is what type of expertise that we can bring as part of that outside of the country and attract those people to move in Canada, and that they see that we have a very strong industry. The other element that also is important to look at if we want to build this vibrant economy is patients. So two elements to come up. Number one is how can we ensure that our patients have access to treatments, up the new treatments that are coming into the market, but at the same time, not only having access to new treatment, but what can we do to ensure that our physicians are able to get access to those treatment early on so that they can be included in the different international studies that are going on from the pharma and other industry that are very important, and how can we do from an enrollment perspective is also very important to ensure that at the end of the day, when companies are looking to enroll patients around the world, that we have the patient pool, but also having access to the third element, which is data. That was also mentioned by Kamira early on about the harness of technology and data infrastructure. So that's another key element that we have to look at, trying to see what we can do to improve the data skill sets that we have, and also access to data, which is very important in the enrollment of patients. And we have seen this in the last year with COVID, for example. How can we ensure that we're able to get the vaccine to the right patient? And we could also discuss and having broader discussion on what we can do in the cancer field. We're actually in some of the new products that are coming, or drugs that are actually coming to the market. How can we ensure that the right patient is actually getting access to the clinical trials and making sure they're able to provide the outcomes that are looked at or that the industry is looking at? So with that, that's going to be my point, and I'm going to turn it around to Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Carl. And thank you for inviting me all. It's really exciting to be here today and discuss this with you. It's dark in Denmark right now in Copenhagen because it's night. So I hope you can see me even though the light is a bit dim. I'll give you some examples of how we work with private-public partnerships here in Denmark. But before doing so, I just want a little disclaimer, because Chanel, you started with explaining how it works in Israel, and Canada should be more inspired and take action on private-public partnerships. And Denmark is in the same position, more or less. Most of our, both in the private sector and also in the public healthcare sector, The people who are working in this area went together to Israel this week to get some more inspiration because they want to become better. So it's not like we solved all the boundaries of doing private-public partnerships in Denmark in life sciences, but we are working at it. So for now, I just want to give you some examples because I think examples are extremely important in cases and how to solve these boundaries and limitations. Because sometimes if you're on a strategic level all the time, it's hard to solve the problems, the real problems, because you don't move forward. You just keep on making paperwork and discussing instead of, being hands-on with private-public partnerships. So first, in Denmark, we're building a lot of new hospitals. Actually, we have 16 different hospital constructions. We have a public healthcare sector. And facing new demographic challenges as the rest of the world, we need new equipment. We need more modern hospitals. The politicians in Denmark, they have decided that we need single rooms in these new hospitals. And that pushes the limits that the hospitals are already facing, or the challenges that the hospitals are already facing, because they don't have enough staff for all these single rooms. So what the new hospitals need is more monitoring systems that can actually monitor the patients. And you could maybe think that you can just make a tender and then buy it. But it's not that easy because it's actually pretty complex. Complex problems need complex solutions. And you can't buy this kind of complex solution just like that. So we see that the clinicians and also the managers managing these new hospitals are reaching out to private companies, also especially foreign companies in the life science sector, asking for these new complex solutions and then bring them into new public-private partnership tenders, trying to not describe the solution they need, but which problem they have, and then invite the companies in to solve this together. This is one way of doing it. And we also see some really, some clinicians that's really struggled. They are best in class in cardiology at our university, one of our university hospitals called Rigshospitalet in Copenhagen, and they want to stay best in class when it comes to research and taking care of patients. And they know if they want to do that, they should have the best equipment and they should know how to use it. And as it is right now, you can't just take an education and then you become best in class. So what they do instead, they invite companies in and they develop this new equipment together, for instance, AI together. And this way they learn a lot from using it from the companies. And also they get the best equipment. And that is really a motivation for them to do that. And since they have come to that, it's simply because they have realized that they don't have the skills. Carl, you talked about talent. It's also about skills in the hospitals. They are not experts in AI, and they know how to use data and interpret data, but they don't know how to build algorithms. So they need the different disciplines that they can find, for instance, in companies. So that's one reason too to invite people in. And they have found some new ways of working together. They actually have now a department for working with private companies called the Hard Tech team. So they have dedicated staff to work with the companies, and they have found out. They have now worked with companies like Tronic and GE Healthcare and Philips and Samsung, etc. And they found out some of the best private-public partnerships that they have done are the ones where they are working side by side and sharing more or less the same office, or at least they are in the same part of the hospital, seeing each other every day. Because you were discussing trust. Yes, trust is extremely important. and also that you can exchange ideas, and also when you find some issues and you don't always agree. So this is another way of doing it. Another and the last example is from radiology. Again, some clinician who faced a lot of challenges. They have so much data, so much imaging data, but they don't have the time to look all data through, and especially because they're in the lack of staff. And so what they need is some more AI to help them look all this data through. And again, complex problems need complex solutions. So they invite AI companies in to validate their algorithms and make them stronger in a Danish setting. And so far, they have been working with some really promising Danish companies, but also some American companies from Silicon Valley with great success. So who's paying for all this? There's different models to do so. But important is to say that it's not only the private sector that has to risk something, for instance, the economic investment, but also the healthcare system. They have to invest. But in the long run, of course, a radiology department or more radiology departments can't invest and have the doors open towards private companies inviting them in all the time. So they ask for funding, and sometimes they do publications together to get the trials funded. And sometimes the companies then pay for themselves. So there's different ways to get around it. This is just some examples. I hope they were concrete enough. And I think that was about it that I wanted to say for now. Thank you.
All right, great. The discussion was extremely profound and a lot of great points just from all the different speakers as well. We thought we can just go now into the panel discussion. Just wanted to summarize a few key themes that I heard across, our different points. One of the things I heard was around aligning on common goals and quick wins. We've heard some examples, how we've done that in COVID. And the question is, what are some of the common goals that we can actually find where we can actually bring public and private partners together? Second one was around the roles in the entire journey from strategy to implementation. And Marie, you touched on a little bit just in terms of thinking through the thread, just in terms of where in the journey different partners can actually come together to work with one another as well. The third bucket that I want to talk about is also infrastructure, which is around, I'll combine a few things there, from foundation to talent to economics, incentives, even, and Marie, you actually touched on even sharing similar spaces for even exchanging ideas, which is, a big part of that theme. There was a theme around trust, whether it's from being stewards of healthcare, whether it's around regulation or policy, just around public and private entities, just trusting each other. And then the last one, just around what are commitments we can make. We've heard, obviously, the example that I provided in terms of Israel. We've heard it from Denmark. What are commitments we can make around ways of working to change the way that we actually evolve, as we go forward? So I thought we can start with some questions around these themes. Maybe we'll start with common goals first. We've heard around COVID-19 created a sense of urgency, which resulted in many public-private partners coming together and rallying around the problem. Jason, you touched on this quite nicely. Maybe I'll start with you just in terms of what are other areas and problems we can rally around with a similar sense of urgency?
Thanks, Shanil. There are two that come to mind right away. I mean, there's many really in our health system. I mean, we can talk about cancer, we can talk about other chronic illnesses, mental health. I mean, these are all areas that are going to require public-private partnership and working closely with one another and with a sense of urgency. I mean, these are health crises that we've been battling for many, many years. And, if we had an approach, sort of an all hands on deck approach like we did with the pandemic, I think that would certainly help move the needle on some of these challenges that we've faced for so long. There's a couple that I think are actually, low-hanging fruit, so to speak, or have already begun. I talked a little bit about the importance of inclusion and diversity within our sector and within our health space as it relates to health equity and health justice. Those are things that, the government of Canada are leading on in terms of, the 50-30 challenge and initiatives like that, not necessarily on a health space, but on an equity and diversity level. And I think there's an opportunity to build out on those platforms by the industry engaging on them in a meaningful way, and then extending that into our healthcare system, into areas of health equity and health justice. So that's one that I would say is a common goal that I think we could all get behind. The other one is rare disease. There's been a commitment by the federal government around rare disease. There's lots of discussion at provincial levels. We just launched a vision paper around an Ontario rare disease strategy and what that would look like. But it's going to require partnership, not just with industry, but at different levels of government. So again, it really is going to be an aligned and coordinated approach across the provincial and federal governments, but with the industry and patients as well. So that, I think those are two that come to mind.
Great. Thanks for sharing that perspective. At least, obviously a lot of the chronic diseases and mental health is going to be big, meaty areas that we're going to touch on. Does anyone else want to share, want to build on that or share a different perspective as well?
Well, I'll just take on from what Jason said. One of the areas which is certainly a really important one, which is the mental health pandemic, which has been going on, as referred to as the silent pandemic, for a long time. A difficult one that nobody seems to, want to really get their teeth into and tackle, but we have to, because imagine if we can deal with the mental health pandemic in a similar way. That's going to address the homelessness side, a big part of homelessness. It's going to, it's part of that equity, diversity, inclusion, because one of the, premises in Canada is health equity for all, and it really isn't there for those people on the street and those people who are struggling with mental illness. This is one of the biggest ones, and I think the economic benefit, people, the number crunchers and the economists look at this, the pharmacoeconomic kind of perspective of this will be huge as well. So that it's not just about good health and helping, solve the mental health problem. It's also addressing a big economic problem, which is frankly going to escalate if we don't deal with this. So this is one of the big ones I think that this country faces. And the other one also that Jason talked about, rare diseases, but I would say some of the big chronic illnesses, where industry has been so ready to step up and be partners with us in working on this and addressing this. Similar to mental illness, which now there's a huge thrust again on research and development and innovation around the neurologic diseases, which that interest had waned for a while, and now big pharma and industry is really back focused on that. So working together in these strong public-private partnerships, and to Anne-Marie's point, having that proximity in working together. She talked about 16 new hospitals being built in Denmark. As far as I know, there's one major project in Canada, which is the new St. Paul's Hospital of the Future, which is a $4.2 billion project, of which the federal government hasn't contributed anything so far. This has been mostly philanthropy, private sector, and the province that has put money in. So we really need to give this a rethink.
That's great. And I think this touches quite nicely on the second theme, just around focusing on the entire journey. Now, Karima, you mentioned these problems are interrelated. And what we might be failing to do is wrapping our arms around the whole problem. And this is a common criticism that we see, is that we've created many of these strategies which are in silos and tackling a sliver of the problem, but have failed to implement that as stakeholders are invested in seeing through the whole journey. I'd
Right.
love to get some perspectives um, around this and how we can get stakeholders to invest in the whole patient journey. And Anne-Marie, maybe I'll start with you, just in terms of an example from Denmark in terms of how stakeholders have started investing in more of that journey, there.
Just put some sound on here. Well, I mean, it's not only the public healthcare system that knows that we have some challenges ahead. It's of course also the private sector. So they keep on investing, building new products, and of course trying to sell them in Europe. And so the big investment is in the R&D. It takes time to develop new digitalized products. And in Denmark, we have a very advanced digital infrastructure. And what we see is now that the public healthcare system is building new products to patients, especially also because of COVID-19. We need more telehealth. We need to see the doctor in new ways. We want more patient empowerment. So we have the private sector not only investing in small products, but in the same, in the entire patient journey together with the public healthcare system. I don't know if I really answered your question directly, but
Yeah, that's really helpful, and those are some of the ways that we think that we can actually start to invest a little bit more. And Carl, maybe I'll pass it to you because it's actually quite related to this. Because when we think about the problem and wrapping our arms around the problem, it comes a lot from the patient's perspective. Would love to hear from you, as you touched on the patient quite a bit, and would love to hear, how you think that stakeholders can invest in this whole patient journey if we start to focus on patient outcomes.
I was just going to say what I was saying, we raised the issue of COVID, and we all know that, for a period of time, patient cannot go, or is very difficult to go see their physician. And we were able rapidly to get physicians that actually the only way that they could see and treat a patient was actually by having the one-on-one meeting. And now we expanded to different ways of getting access to patient. Insurance sector has also moved that, we can now have access to physician online and at least have, a first, if I may say, meeting or consultation with the patient, online. So I think that we were able to find new ways to address some of the needs that, we were faced with the crisis of COVID. So, people actually, the patient and the physician actually found trust that actually they could have a conversation in a new way of discussing between the two. So I think the trust issue is a big one that actually we have to continue to build on. The second element around patient as well is that another point is that we all know that a lot of people are sharing a lot of information on the media and things like that. So once again, the data element is one that actually we have to look at it from a trust perspective, from the patient, from the users, from the government, all of the different sources that actually are in a big need of using data to be able to treat better, to actually accelerate the process of doing some research, and other key elements that we know that data is going to be a key and play a key role in the future. And actually data plays a key role right now on different elements of life science and also research. So the trust is there, but there's also some lack of trust between the different stakeholders on finding the right way of using the data. So I think that's another element that we have to look at. And if I go to another element back to trust, is that, we have a lot of people have done a lot of reports. We all know of what are the key issues that the sector as the environment is facing in Canada, and there seems to still be some trust issue between the different stakeholders to move forward with some of the recommendations that were made that, Karima presented, that actually make a lot of sense. But, how can we build the trust and move forward with those issues to improve the environment that we are all working in Canada?
Shanil, if I could maybe just add really quickly to what Carl said, because I think it's an important comment, the importance of data to underpin many initiatives, I think, in terms of the future of Canadian healthcare. But one of the things that it also supports is a value-based approach to health procurement. And that is absolutely fundamental to putting patients first. We right now, we're so focused on cost and sustainability, and with new technologies coming on board like personalized medicines and gene therapies, we need to find ways to make sure that we're getting these technologies to the patients that need them, but we do it in a responsible way that has the best health outcomes and brings value into our system. And the way to do that is by having data systems where we can measure and track and report and get real world data back. So I think that's a very important key, and it's a culture shift, right? I mean, the constraints on our health systems have been driving this cost-focused approach for many, many years, and it's ingrained into the way we procure in our health system. But that has to fundamentally change to a value-based system.
No, that's great. And maybe, even touching on that then, if we start to think about, heard a common theme around data and infrastructure as well, there's a lot of consortiums now coming in who want to focus on precision medicine and personalized solutions through the build of data platforms. We've seen CFIN, Terry Fox, Supercluster, Montreal AI Zone, and there's a number of initiatives that have been happening at research and different hospitals. What's your advice to all of these consortiums on where and how to start to actually help in the sharing of these data systems or create that trust to help build the infrastructure to even get this going in the first place? And I'll keep that as an open question and would love to hear from different folks here.
I'll maybe jump in first and foremost. I think the one thing we have to recognize is that oftentimes different entities are competing for this same pot of dollars. And that sometimes does not create the most conducive environment for collaboration or, strained collaborations. And I think we need to find ways to overcome that hurdle. So again, coming back to those common goals and figuring out what it is that we're trying to do and really raising the water for all boats needs to be the approach. It's tough to do. It's easy to say, it's tough to do. But that's fundamentally what's needed, is where organizations that are operating in this space need to talk to one another. They need to sort of put their own agendas aside and create that common agenda that they're working towards.
I think that following on that this needs to be done at the highest level. It has to be top down, bottom up as well. And I think one of the big things that needs to happen is we need to have kind of a national trust. Health is a national endeavor. It's as important as any national security to a country. And frankly, I don't think we quite look at it in that context. And I think that a policy around our, industrial development in general, and I'm not talking about only the health bioscience sector, but in general, we need to have a longer term policy. We tend to still operate in these political 4-year cycles, and everything is done in that context. So we never really scale up even the great things that we initiate. And Canada has had some great ideas that, frankly, countries like Israel and Germany and others have borrowed from us, our IRAP programs, our SHRED programs. and built on them, and then they have a 2.0 and a 3.0 version. Whereas we will stick with that original. We never scale up. So the scale and speed at which sometimes we do things is a challenge. All that can only be addressed if you're really willing to have a national policy, an integrated national economic policy that addresses these things in the way that Britain does. The UK does this in a great way. And if you look at the big scale projects that they do on science and on science development, hand in glove with industry. Some 20 years ago, they realized that there wasn't a them and an us with government and national health and industry, that they had to work together. And to Anne-Marie's point, you have to almost sit side by side, working together and building on policies. Then you can do this in a big and robust way. The second point is that you need to have your public on your side. And I don't think that in Canada we adequately respect our public and educate them. I think we are a little bit elitist in the way we handle, our science and health, communications and development. These things should be communicated to the public on a regular basis. Education, whether it's through media, social media, television, whatever, but the right and correct information, not when you have a crisis, but on an ongoing basis. And again, I would point you to Germany and England, for example, the kind of programs and documentaries they would have on television regularly around science, health, compared to the amount that we see on Canadian television, for example. So these are just a couple of points.
If I might add just one element, I think that we have an opportunity, and my fear is that once COVID is gone, the people are going to move to another crisis, and let's take the opportunity that we have right now to make changes and get everyone aligned and move and find some solutions that we all know what they are. They have been presented, and let's now act on them and finding the trust that we all work together to finding solution to improve the Canadian environment for life science.
Carl, I couldn't agree with you more. There's a bit of a joke going around that the last symptom of COVID-19 is amnesia, so we need to act now.
I agree.
Anne-Marie, it looks like you were going to say something.
Yeah. I'm just, when is COVID really gone? It's not, I sometimes think it's a never ending story. So maybe we should just feel the urgency all the time. I just want to add one more thing is private-public partnerships are difficult. They're complex. So if you have the trust and you find the real partner, you also need some kind of agreement, to start your project. I know it's really low tech, but this is a very big problem. It's actually very difficult to make a good agreement, public-private partnership agreement. So what we're trying right now in Denmark is to have some legal assistance. So, for instance, attorneys who's been working with this area, they are helping new public-private partnerships in doing these agreements. So the legal staff working with this, they can learn how to work with it. For instance, in value-based healthcare or value-based procurement. And then we're doing a model. We have a life science strategy, and one initiative is to do a model of value-based procurement and how to evaluate the risk and choose the right partner and to find out how much should you risk. So, a lot of tools are needed in order to succeed. And of course, some strategies and some real problems and some cases and people who want to work with this.
That's great. Now, I have many more questions and could talk about this all day, but I know we're coming in at time. I want to thank you all for your rich perspectives and drawing on your experience on how we can build partnerships and investments to help Canada thrive in this space. With that, maybe I'll pass it back to Anne-Marie Wright to help close us for the session.
Thank you so much, Shanil, and thank you to the extraordinary panel led by Shanil, but of course, Karima, Jason, Carl, Anne-Marie, Christina. There was a quote at the very beginning of the session that we have the recipe for success in Canada. We just need to get cooking. We have the panel to answer we have the panel for approximately 10 minutes to answer some questions that you may have. I encourage you, please, to use the question application on this platform. Please also direct your question to the person you would like to answer that question. If it is broader or a broad-based question, that's all right too. Chanel will be very happy to facilitate the answer to that question as well. So please submit your questions now. Thank you.
So one question that we have is around the commitments we can make. We're not bystanders in this ecosystem. We are leaders and stewards in the ecosystem with the roles that we play in the organization, in our own organizations. What are commitments that you as individuals and leaders are willing to make today to facilitate private-public partnerships and the growth in our ecosystem? Maybe Carl, we can start with you first, and then we'll go around the table.
I was going to touch on one point, which is more from a Quebec perspective, but in Quebec right now, we're working on updating our policy on our own strategy around the life science sector. So, been playing an active role on it. We're on the verge of moving to the next step. So for me, it's going to making sure that, all stakeholders are included, that we also have the patient view that is also brought into this perspective. So making sure that our new policy is in line with what we have been saying since the beginning of our conversation, and that we're addressing those needs and moving forward and bringing all of the stakeholders. That's number one. Number two is to continue to reach out to my colleagues around the country, and I can say to Jason, it's to continue to work together on those national issues and making sure that we all work on a common voice to ensure that the governments and the stakeholders are actually moving in the right direction and actually are taking actions of what they actually have put out in terms of the roadmaps that were done. We have tremendous people like Karina that's been involved for years and working on working groups coming out with recommendation. And as you were saying, we have the recipe, just, now let's cook the cake and make it happen. So my engagement is to continue to rally my stakeholders and making sure that we're all pushing and making this happen in Canada.
That's great. Anne-Marie?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, I'm in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So from time to time, we are invited in to do some strategies. And of course, that is with the latest knowledge of what is working and what is not working. So my commitment, that would be, of course, to keep on making great strategies to get together with the public healthcare system and the private companies. And then another thing that is a work with investments. So keep on trying to find the people who's actually really committed to this in the public healthcare system and make them with the companies who's really committed and knows how to do this.
That's great. Jason, you want to go next?
Sure. Very, very similar to Carl in that, we often advocate for, evidence-based policy making, but equally so, we need to be evidence-based advocates as well. I mean, we are science-based organizations, so producing the evidence to back up, our positions is really important, and that's something that we continue to hold as a value here at Life Science Ontario in all of the advocacy work that we do. But equally important, Carl also mentioned, is being accountable and holding government accountable to commitments that they make, like the strategies that they've put forward. So now's the time, I think, for us to do that and to be active partners with government. It's also in our advocacy not just to be pointing out problems and challenges, but also identifying solutions. So again, that's a very important aspect of the work that we do. We are a broad-based organization that has the ability to be a convener of many stakeholders, patients, industry, big and small, academia, government. And so we need to do that. We need to play that role of bringing stakeholders together in a really important way. And finally, I talked quite a bit today about inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And it starts within our own organization from the top down. And so we have made very public commitments around diversity and inclusion within our organization, but also sharing the best practices and empowering our stakeholders within our sectors so that life sciences can be a leading sector in inclusion and diversity. And so those are the commitments that we feel very strongly about.
And Kramer?
I wear many hats, and if I just take two of my big hats, which is the chair of the Health Bioscience Economic Strategy Table, and my role as CEO and partner at Colorectal Venture, as chair of HBEST, I'm absolutely committed to holding not only the federal government, but provincial governments, because we want to break this federal, provincial, territorial, barrier and make it a very smooth and seamless sort of way to work. We talk about public-private partnerships, but there's also public-public partnerships that we need to learn to work well in. And so we are going to push ahead with, HBEST 2.0, which is about implementation and ensuring that this moves forward. And I know that all the other company CEOs and members of Health Canada and ISED who were on our table are committed to this as well. So, that's an absolute commitment that we have made, that we will push forward with government. But in my role as, a venture capitalist, we are headquartered in Vancouver. We chose to be headquartered in Vancouver. We're a global fund. We could have been headquartered anywhere in the world. And I was actually asked, why Vancouver? Why Canada? Really, shouldn't we be in Silicon Valley or in Boston or in Europe? And, we need to be in a high-tech city, which is vibrant and entrepreneurial. And, we picked Vancouver and we were insistent that this is where we wanted to be headquartered, although we have offices in both Boston and Silicon Valley and in China and other places. But the point I want to make is that it is important to be parked to where the science is and to validate that science and to say this is good enough innovation coming out that we want to be here to invest in that innovation. So if you're not in Canada, and we don't have enough venture capital in Canada. We now have, good angel seed capital, even VCs that can do Series A, but we don't have VCs that can do the latest stage, the kind of stuff we want to anchor companies here and keep them in Canada. And that's one of the policies of HBEST has been, we've said, well, we need to be talking to our pension funds, for example, Caisse Depot and others, who invest in technology outside Canada. We need to have a Canadian fund. This is Canadian taxpayer money, Canadian funds that are parked in Canada that are big enough so that we can syndicate with external money that comes in, but our companies don't have to move jurisdictions and then go and realize economic benefit elsewhere. So this is one of our commitments that, we're going to work very hard to bring, and we have brought some of the world's biggest venture funds into Canada, people like Deerfield and so on, to invest in Canadian companies. But what we don't want, we have to have our own Canadian capital if we want to anchor these companies here and build strong clusters. To have these super clusters anchored and sustainable, you need to have anchored companies. So that's our commitment to ensure we try and enable that to happen and break down barriers between provinces and the federal government, as well as between industry and the government.
That's fantastic. And I'll maybe lead with or close with my commitment as well. Now, as a partner and the life sciences healthcare leader at Deloitte, we're independent partners to both public sector and private sector organizations. So the vantage point that we have is we have a bird's eye view to what's going on across the landscape, and not just in the life science and healthcare industry, but also cross industry and also globally, as we're a global organization. So the few commitments that I know that I'll be making is, one, we're working on the strategies for a lot of these organizations and consortiums. It'll be important to actually bring them together and shape the collective strategy where we can actually think about how do we do this together. That's one. The second one is around we have strong relationships with a lot of these entities, which means with these strong relationships, we have built a trust with a lot of them. We are in a position to challenge a lot of their value propositions, where sometimes consortiums are doing a great job in terms of advancing their propositions. Sometimes we should even challenge what they're going after. So this way we make sure that we're after collective goals as opposed to going after arbitrary investments. And the third one is around, we're the largest system integrator right now globally. And we do have an integration problem in Canada. So what I will commit to is leveraging the assets that we have built, like the data platforms, the applications, to accelerate the build and implementation across the different common problems that we discussed today as well. So those are some of the commitments that I want to make as well.
Thank you so much for a really wonderful wrap-up session. There's one question that I think is completely appropriate to ask to this panel before we close today. There's dozens of patient groups who are participating as attendees at this conference. And we started the session by talking about having the recipe for success. So the question to the group is, how in fact can patient groups become sous chefs and insist in the development of the sector? So continuing on the theme of cooking, the question again is how patient groups can become sous chefs and assist in the process. It's not directed at any one person. Okay.
I'll happily take a crack at that. I mean, patients are at the center of everything that this industry does. And so they are of the utmost importance. And I think what they need to do is share their experiences, and share their experiences not only to the industry that's providing technology solutions, but also share their experiences with healthcare providers and government officials that are setting the frameworks by which our health system operates. So just be engaged, continue to be engaged, continue to be outspoken, continue to share your lived experiences, and it will help our industry create the technologies to meet the needs, and it will help government and health policymakers adopt new policies and frameworks to address some of the challenges that we're seeing. So stay engaged. That's number one.
Thank you so much, Jason.
I can add to that that I think patient stakeholders need to demand to be part of the process and to have transparency, especially when it comes to, access, to understand how best and ensure that they have good access to both information, knowledge, and treatments, and the best treatments that are available. And so they need to be part of the whole process. In general, they need to be informed, but they'll need to push for that and ask for that. And there are many great patient advocacy groups in many of the disease areas which are very active and vocal, but it kind of needs to be across the board. And I think, earlier on, I spoke about the importance of public education and knowledge, and how vital that was, especially to keep up with the rapid change in technology today. And so they need to ask for it and demand that they have access to current information, the best treatments that are available, and what's going on, and pros and cons, and the transparency.
Yeah, and I think, Karima, the education you provided, educating on the healthcare system and beyond in European countries is definitely a part of this. And Shanil, I'll hand it back to you for the last comment.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for that. Yeah, one thing I'll also add just very quickly, the things that we also need to change just in terms of patient advocacy groups is life sciences organizations need to also embody the spirit of human-centered design and be able to bring in the patient's voice early on. This is something that we're seeing changing with some life sciences organizations pretty early. So that's a mindset. So you don't do the strategy and then bring the patient, you bring the patient right at the outset of the strategy. So I just wanted to add that comment as well. But yeah, I know we only have less than a minute remaining, and really want to thank everyone for their time. It was obviously an enriching discussion as well, and looking forward to you seeing what the landscape kind of holds for us in 2022 and moving beyond. And it's a promising future for all of us.
Right. And let's remove the idea of amnesia. We just need to go do. Thank you so much to everybody. And we're going to take it over to Barry Stein to close the conference today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. And our commitment to you is to continue with our patient-centered approach to cancer clinical trials, our work in awareness, education, advocacy, and support for patients, of course, throughout the clinical trial process. So revolution, innovation, transformation of clinical trials in Canada comes with disruption to our oncology ecosystem. However, if we can continue the momentum of collaboration, building trust, while increasing investment in life sciences, public-private partnerships, and maintaining a commitment to patient centricity in modernized clinical trials, we will have made great progress. As Greg Simon said, to infinity and beyond. Thank you for attending our 5th annual Patient Group Pathways to Cancer Clinical Trials and Real-World Evidence Conference. If you're interested in participating in our ongoing work in the patient-centered approach to cancer clinical trials, we would love to hear from you, almost made it, to hear from you so that you can contribute to the evolution of cancer trials throughout the year. You'll receive an evaluation questionnaire in the coming days, and if you provide your contact information, we'll be delighted to reach out to you. Thank you once again to our panel leaders, discussants, sponsors, as well as to our wonderful CCC team who made this conference happen, including our facilitator, Anne-Marie Wright. Have a wonderful evening and see you again next year.